But we have taken the business from doing about $30,000 a year when we took over to $75,000 the first year, and then $150,000, $300,000, $500,000, $800,000, and then I knew that $1 million in sales in 1 year was within our grasp, and we did that a few years ago. Then we did $1.2 million. This year we're well on track to do over $2 million in sales. I was asked to give a presentation for a small business workshop here locally, and I was ecstatic because I really like to help out budding entrepreneurs. According to statistics, approximately half of all businesses fail within the first 5 years. The good news is there are things that we can do to not wind up on the bad side of that stat. And today, we're going to go over a few of those. Hello everybody, my name is Jim Olson, and I'm from Western Trading Post, where we deal predominantly in collectibles. Western collectibles for the most part, and that puts us in a really specialized field. But I'm here to tell you today that it does not matter where you come from. What matters is where you are going. I am living proof that it does not matter where you come from. You see, I was born into a very poor family in a very poor area. And I didn't get along all that great with my parents, and so by the time I was 16 years old, I was completely on my own and supporting myself. I have been homeless at times and sometimes wondered where my next meal was going to come from. I struggled for many years, that is, until I realized I was my own worst enemy. I was my own undoing. And so I had to change my attitude and change my internal message from that of why me to that of how can I change this for the better? How can I make myself better? How can this situation be better? And once I changed my attitude, I was starting down the right path. And so the first point that I'd like to bring up that I believe in is attitude is everything. The great Henry Ford used to say, whether you believe that you can or that you can't, either way, you are correct. Like I said, at 16, I was on my own. By the time I was 20, I was actually homeless for a while. I drank way too much and dabbled in drugs. It was one of the low points in my life. But then I decided to change my attitude. I decided that I wanted to turn my life around. By the time I was 30 years old, I was a millionaire, at least on paper, which is what they say qualifies you as a millionaire. I had $1 million in assets. By the time I was 34 years old, my business made $1 million in 1 year. And the next year, we grossed $3.5 million, and that year, I actually had to write the IRS a check for $400,000. But you know what? I could do it. I was able to do it. And I never thought I'd ever see a poor day again. But then things changed. The Great Recession came along and humbled many people, myself included. In 2009, I had 2 different attorneys advise me to file bankruptcy because I owed over $1 million and I didn't have a lot of cash flow at the time. But you know what? I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave the creditors hanging like that. I felt the right thing to do was to get them taken care of. Even though the attorneys had told me that the way we had things set up in different LLCs and whatnot, that by filing bankruptcy, we could probably keep most of what we had, I thought the right thing to do was to pay what I owed and get it taken care of, even if it meant starting all over once again. And I learned another lesson worth mentioning during this time, and that is you should never think that you're too big or too good to fail. You have to stay humble. As the self-made billionaire Tillman Fertitta likes to say, there is a paddle for everybody's backside, meaning that you're never too big or too strong or too untouchable, that there isn't somebody or something right around the corner that could take you down a notch or 2 or more. Well, we got through all that, and then in 2011, an opportunity come along to get into a new business. People who owned the old Fouts Trading Post, they were in bad health and they were wanting to get out. They were friends of mine, and they were begging me to purchase their business. And even though I really didn't want to get into retail, we did so with the thought that it would be a short-term investment, that over the course of about a year we would liquidate the assets of the company and make a quick buck and then move on to something else. My mother-in-law, who was also needing something to do about that time, so my wife and I brought her in on the deal as a partner, and we did so because she had experience in this line of work, and we felt that she would bring a lot to the table. So voila, we became a small family business. But during the course of that first year, something changed. We started having fun with what we were doing, and I could see that there was definitely some potential here and some opportunity to make a little money. So after that first year, we decided to get out of liquidation mode and get into growth or expansion mode instead. When we first had purchased the business, the couple they were a retired couple who had bought it at the time, and they told us that they said, hey, maybe you can make $1,500 to as much as $3,000 in a good month. Well, I tell you what, today we do way more than that per day. See, they were treating it as a part-time job or a side income, and that's exactly what it was producing for them. Well, for about the last 7 years or so, we've been in growth mode and trying to take this business from that of a part-time or side income to that of an industry leader in our field. Well, we're still working on that last part, and we have a long ways to go, but we feel like it's been quite an accomplishment to get where we're at. From starting out taking over a business that was doing about $35,000 a year to $75,000 that first year, I believe, and then we went to $150,000, $300,000, $500,000, $800,000, and then I knew that $1 million in sales in a year was definitely attainable, and we did that a few years back. Then $1.2 million, and this year we are well on track. About mid-year, we're well on track to do over $2 million in sales in this year alone. Now that may not sound like much to some, and I know there are many businesses that do much more than that, and it's certainly not as high as we intend to go, but from where we started out, with very little cash on hand, very little cash flow, and we didn't borrow, well, we couldn't borrow any money because of that mess that we had to clean up a few years before that. So from where we started until here, we feel like that's a pretty decent accomplishment, doing it one little sale at a time, a little building block here and there. I feel like now, after several years of struggling, that we're finally at a point where we can start to grow in leaps and bounds, because I do know that the bigger numbers get, the easier that they are to multiply. That, and you know what? I am learning all the time. When we first started out in this business, I would go and I'd talk to guys and study what guys were doing who were maybe selling a few $100,000 to $1 million a year in this industry. And I saw what they were doing, and I said, you know what, we can do that. And I figured out how to implement certain strategies into our business to get to that level. Nowadays, I study and I talk to people who are doing $10, $20 million a year, and I say, hey, that's not that big a deal. We can definitely do that. There's even a handful of people in this industry who sell as much as $100 million a year in the collectibles field. That's quite an accomplishment. I definitely like to see what they're doing and study what they're doing. I know that we're nowhere near that level yet, but they do help inspire me, so I like to watch what they're doing. You see, I'm a firm believer in, if you want to know something about Hawaii, for example, you don't go talk to somebody who read about Hawaii in a textbook and now they feel like they're qualified to teach on the subject. No, go talk to somebody who's been there and done that, preferably many times, and has good experience on it and is an expert in the field. Go talk to them and find out what you need to know. I believe finding a good mentor is extremely important to all business owners. And that brings me to the next point that I'd like to bring up, which is find a good mentor or mentors, because they can definitely help you out, but also pay attention to who you listen to. I believe it's wise for all of us to have mentors because they can definitely help make the path easier. But just remember this, advice is cheap, but bad advice can cost you. Another point that I'd like to bring up that I feel like is an important aspect for all business owners actually, is that of change. And back in the 60s, Bob Dylan, he liked to sing, well, the times they are changing.
Well, the times they are changing.
And here in this day and age, they're changing at lightning speed, faster than ever. You know, what worked yesterday or the day before probably isn't working today or tomorrow. The times are definitely changing fast, and you can't get stuck in the rut of too much old school thinking, because they'll just run right by you. It reminds me of the old story about a horse and mule dealer back around the turn of the last century who said, you know, I think that those automobiles are just a fad. I'm going to stick with these horses and mules because they're reliable. Well, it wasn't long before he went out of business. But at the same time, there was another guy that I read about who had a horse and mule barn, and he became interested in motorcycles and then cars. And before long, he turned his horse and mule barn into an automobile dealership, and he wound up becoming a multimillionaire. So two guys in the same field, one decided not to embrace change, and the other did. One went out of business, and the other became a multimillionaire. So embrace change. It's coming at you no matter what. And so you got to figure out how to roll with the punches as they come along. Another aspect that I feel is very, very important to becoming a successful entrepreneur is your work ethic. You know, there's people out there who subscribe to a 4-hour work week. They even wrote a book about it, and there's videos on it and stuff like that. And that's fine if you can get away with it. But I feel like you're probably just going to be in survival mode if you can do something like that. As a matter of fact, I think 40 hours a week is probably just survival mode. Most people don't really get ahead much on 40 hours a week. Most successful entrepreneurs that I know or that I've read about wind up putting in 50, 60, 70, sometimes 80 hours a week, especially in the beginning when they're just trying to get traction and get going. So I think that people who just put in 40 hours a week, that's kind of just a starting point, in my opinion. But it's also important to remember this: even if you're just putting in those 40 hours a week, you're going to spend a lot of your adult life working. I mean, just do the math. If you work 40 hours a week throughout your career, that's a big percentage. I think it's somewhere around a third of your time. So you better enjoy what you're doing. It's important to enjoy what you're doing because you're going to spend a lot of time doing it. And that also helps if, you know, it's tough to put in 50, 60, 70 hours a week if you're dreading going to work. And the other thing that needs to be brought up about work and pay and everything like that and your work ethic, a lot of people don't realize that you're not paid for your time. You don't trade time for money. You know, some employee might say, well, wait a minute, I work 40 hours a week and I'm paid $20 an hour, and that gives me a gross check of $800 a week. So I am trading my time for money. But what people don't realize, and especially an entrepreneur has to know, is what you truly get paid for is your value that you bring to people. The more that you can help solve somebody's problem, or the more value you bring to the world, that is how you make more money. I guarantee you, even the employee who is working 40 hours a week, the difference between the one making $15 an hour and $50 an hour is because the one who's making $50 an hour is providing some sort of greater service to the world in some way than the one making $15 an hour. And that's especially true for entrepreneurs. I guarantee you Apple wasn't built on a 40-hour work week, not by the CEOs anyway. Amazon, Walmart. I recently read Sam Walton's autobiography, and that was a really good read. And he commonly worked 70, 80 hours a week, but he loved what he was doing. And he went from becoming a store clerk in his teenage years and college years to, I believe it was sometime in his 60s, he became at that time the wealthiest man in America. And that was because he loved what he was doing, and he put in a lot of time and effort doing it. And he also understood that the more people that he could help solve a problem or provide a service to, the more he would make. That's why the CEO of Amazon, who I believe is the richest man in the world right now, makes billions of dollars because he put a structure and a system into place where he helps millions of people a day with some sort of problem in shopping online, where the guy who works for him, who works in, say, the fulfillment warehouse, he also plays a small part in helping people every day. He delivers their stuff to them, gets their packages to them. But in his job, he can only help a handful of people because he's limited into how many deliveries he can make or whatever a day. And that's why his paycheck reflects what he does, because he's helping a limited number of people a day, whereas the guy at the top, he has a finger in every single one of those millions of sales that happen each and every day. So work ethic is extremely important, but also like what you're doing and figure out how to become of greater service to your community, the city, the county, the state, whatever. The broader your reach with helping solve people's problems, the more money that you're going to make. I tell you a little bit about my backstory, not to brag in any way at all, but to reiterate the fact that I believe it does not matter where you come from. What matters is where you're going. It doesn't matter where you started out. What matters is your attitude and your plan going forward, more than anything else. I'm living proof that you can start from nothing. I've had two different businesses that went from basically zero to more than $1 million in sales in under 10 years' time. So I know that it can be done. Well, now you know a little bit about me and some of my thoughts on success and where I came from. And I'd like for you guys to feel free to reach out if you ever need anything at all. I'm here and I like to talk to people and run ideas by each other. So if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out. Thank you.